for what I'm going to show you next, probably the best thing I can do is get myself a cylinder. So let me just go to standard primitives, cylinder. I'm just going to click here, draw myself a cylinder, and press Z to zoom in on it. I'm just going to press J to get rid of the selection bracket because I don't want it to distract us here. And I'm just going to go and say convert to editable poly, go into edge mode, and now let me just show you one of the main features of edit poly. Let's say I select this edge, and I also select the edge next to it. Just hold down Control to select that edge. Now there's a tool, I'm just going to press minus to make these gizmos a little bit smaller. There's a tool here called Connect, and what that allows you to do is to take two edges that you have selected and create a third edge between them. So if I press Connect, you can see it's done that. It's actually created that edge, and it's got it selected for me. So that may not seem to be very useful, but let's say I was to model this mesh and I wanted to create some more detail at this point. Now, I want to have a ring that goes all the way around the entire cylinder. And the way to do that is to use this option here, which is called ring. And if I press it, you can see it's actually selected all of the edges around the entire mesh very, very quickly. Now, because they're all selected, I can press connect. And when we connect it, as you can see, it's inserted a new edge ring all the way along there. And that edge ring is also selected. So now we can actually move that edge ring just by using our gizmo. We can move it around to wherever we want it to go. So that's the ring tool. Then we have the loop tool, which is actually a partner to it. And what that allows us to do is, if we click on an edge, if we want to select that run of edges, then we click on loop. And as you can see, it gives us our selection all the way around the object again. So it's important to remember that when you have lines in this orientation and you want to select them all the way around an object, that's a ring of edges. And that when you have edges which are continuous, which form a loop, then that's actually a loop of polygons. So that's what they're referred to when you're modeling. So I'll just turn on ignore backfacing to make sure that we don't deselect or select something in the back of the object here. And I'm just going to click on loop again, or let me just click on here and here, click on loop. And as you can see, we've got two loops now, and we can move those around. So this may not seem to be that much of a feature really, but it's actually the basis of subdivision surface modeling. And if I get all of these edges here, I'm just going to delete these. I'm going to click on loop and then backspace. You can see we've actually still got these vertices still left here, so I'm just going to select these as well. Make sure that I have them all. I don't because I've got back facing turned on, so let me just turn that off. Make sure that I've got them all. Yes, I have, apart from a couple of extra here. Just use Alt to deselect them, and then I can press backspace, and it's removed all those vertices. We're back to the cylinder that we started off with, and what I just want to show you is how, on a very basic level, subdivision modeling works, but I'm not going to explain it in any great detail, but I just want to give you a very basic idea of why selecting rings and creating loops is such an important part in sub-D modeling. If we go to sub-object mode, and I'll just go up to the modifier panel, I'm just going to go down and choose Turbo Smooth, and that's actually now attempting to smooth this cylinder. You can see it's giving slightly funky looking results on top, but if I turn up the smoothing a couple of times, I think that's enough actually to show you what we're going to do here. Now I can go down to Edit Poly, and I can turn on Show End Result, and I'm going to go into sub-object mode here, and you can see we've got our original mesh shown as orange, and we've got our subdivided mesh shown by the surface here. Now what I want to do is I want to actually add some more detail halfway down this cylinder, and I want to create a dip in the middle, a sort of rut here, which goes all the way around. So let me just do that. Just going to select this edge here, and I'm going to select a ring, and I'm going to create a loop that goes all the way around. I'm going to press W, and I'm just going to go up here and change here to just as we saw earlier in the DVD. I'm going to use Use Selection Center, so we don't have a gizmo for every single edge that we have selected, which gets a bit distracting. And then I'm just going to move this edge up here. Oops. Actually, let me just turn this off, just make this a little bit clearer. I've made a bit of a mistake there. I've actually clicked on loop rather than ring. So let me just select that edge, click on ring, going to connect it, and then I'm going to move this edge up here, but now I'll actually turn on show end result, and you can see that as I move it, it's actually bunching up the geometry, which is interpolated between these two edges by the smooth system. So I'm just going to move this up here, and I'm going to select this edge, select a ring, and then connect again, and then I'm just going to move this edge down here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the edge in the middle again, and I'm going to go ring, and I'm going to press R for scale, and as you can see, it's got every single gizmo shown for every single edge. I'm just going to change that to the center of the selection, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do a three-dimensional scale in here, and I'm going to do all three axes at the same time. I'm just going to do it on two axes. I'm just going to use this option here to pull it in. So I'm going to just pull it into here, and it's actually given us quite a nice smooth curve here, but in this case I actually want this to be a hard edge. And the way that you get hard edges in subdivision modeling is, I'll just turn this off, what you need to do is put in more subdivisions close to other subdivisions, and that will then bunch the polygons in there and create a nice hard edge. So in this case I'm going to select here, let's change to translate, and here I'm going to select ring, and then I'm going to connect them, and then I'm going to press R for scale, and I'm going to scale on the Z axis, and that should then pull these edges upwards closer to this edge here. I'm going to get it very close, and then I'm going to select here, and I'm going to select a ring again, and instead of clicking on the connect button, I'm actually going to use the settings option here, and that allows us to change how this tool works. So currently it's set up to give us one loop when we click on the connect button, but I can actually change that to give us two. So I'm going to say OK to that, and that actually gives us two edges. And then I'm going to use scale on the Z axis to push these edges up until, again, they're very tight up against here and here. And now, if I turn on show end result, you can see we've got a nice sharp edged looking rut there. We've got this sort of depression going into the surface. Now if I scale these edges again, you can see that it's changing the curvature, and as I get the edges very close to the other edges around them, it creates a hard edge, a much harder edge. But the really nice thing is this mesh has, instead of having a 90-degree angle here, it actually has a nice beveled effect, which is really, really cool feature in the model. It actually makes it work much better when you're doing lighting and rendering. And that is basically the basis of the whole subdivision surface modeling technique. You take a basic mesh, which you can see here, and then you apply a smoothing algorithm to it, which produces a smooth surface. And then you go down to the basic mesh and you model it, and you put in edges and so on and so forth to actually give you the end result. If we look at our mesh here again, and we go back into sub-object mode, you can see we have a number of other tools which we can use to actually work with this particular system. And I'm going to show you more of those in the next chapter. But for now, I think you've got a basic idea of what the difference is between Edit Mesh and Edit Poly, and how the architectural differences in Edit Poly allow you to have a fast and efficient subdivision surface modeling workflow. You could actually implement these tools in Edit Mesh, but they just wouldn't make sense because it doesn't support true polygons, and also selecting edges in a ring and a loop is very, very slow, which is why we had the Edit Poly system introduced to 3ds Max. As you can see, the differences between eMesh and Edit Poly are actually quite marked. However, there are many more similarities than there are actually differences. But these days, I tend to use Edit Poly for most of my modeling projects, and that can be both sub-D modeling and also when I'm modeling pure poly models. That is where, you know, for instance, if this object was modeled, I could put in some edges here, let's say, and do a connect. Let me just undo that, just change the connect so it's actually one connector at a time again. And now I can pull this up here, I can get the top of this model, and I can then scale that in just on these two axes here. And what I've done is I've created a little bevel there, as you can see. I'll just move this up to create over 45-degree bevel. And that's what I would class as being pure poly modeling. You're not really worrying about any kind of smoothing algorithm coming into play. But when you're doing subdivision surface modeling, then you really do have to worry about the end result. And so you actually have to build the underlying geometry to give you a nice looking subdivision surface at the end of it. So we have these two disciplines. We have pure poly modeling where you're not worrying about smoothing, and we have subdivision surface modeling where the smooth surface is obviously the end result that we're looking for, and therefore how it smooths is very, very important. Now, the thing about the Edit Poly is it actually has a lot of tools in it that actually make poly modeling in general just very easy to do. So you don't even have to worry about doing subdivision surface modeling. If you want to do any kind of poly modeling in Max, then generally you want to be working in Edit Poly because it's got the most features. It's also very fast to work with. If we look down here, we also have options such as paint deformation, and this doesn't actually exist inside the Edit Mesh type. And again, paint deformation is one of those things where you need the kind of winged edge architecture to make it a fast and efficient system. So this is a great little system for doing organic modeling. We're not going to be looking at it in this DVD, but we will in the third DVD. And again, it's one of those things that relies on the Edit Poly architecture. For now, I hope this comparison between the eMesh and the ePoly has given you a good working understanding of each and how they both work on a pretty low level. When I first started modeling in 3ds Max, I used a system that did not explicitly use polygons. So when I first got my hands dirty and hand-created polygons, I found it a little bit intimidating. I suppose I was a little spoilt from using primitives for so long, but I hope you will not suffer from those trepidations as I did. These days, the polygon modeling toolset in 3ds Max is vastly in advance of that offered in Release 1. And it's not really surprising because we're actually 10 years on from that point. So the poly modeling toolset these days is actually very, very good. It's excellent. It's probably one of the best systems in any package out there. So I really don't think that you're going to have the same kind of problems that I did getting up to speed with your poly modeling skills in 3ds Max. The tools are there, they're very powerful, and they're very easy to use. You just need to experiment with them. I've only actually shown you a smattering of the tools here, as we'll be looking at the subdivision side of things in a lot more detail in DVD 4 in this series. But what I'm going to do in the next chapter is I'm going to look at modeling some very basic parts of a model that we'll be basically working on during this entire series. And what I'm going to build is I'm going to build a very simple go-kart, and don't worry, it's not going to be anything complex. But what I want to do is I want to actually model each part of the go-kart in the mesh type, or the geometry type I should say, that is being taught in that particular DVD. So in this DVD, we're going to look at modeling the pure poly objects in that mesh. And then in the next DVD, we're going to look at modeling parts of the go-kart which are actually built up out of splines, out of curves. So that'll be things like the tires and maybe the steering wheel and things like that. And then in DVD 4 in this series, where we're looking at subdivision surfaces, I'm going to look at actually modeling some parts of the go-kart out of sub-Ds. Those will be things like maybe the brake handle, and also augmenting the shape of the steering wheel by adding some knobbly ridges to it to actually make it a bit easier to grip. So hopefully by working on this very simple model, we'll give you a practical knowledge of how to model things in 3ds Max. Now, as I said, in the next chapter, I'm going to do poly modeling. And it's going to be very basic. At the end of the day, this is a fundamentals DVD, so I just want to get your ball rolling, as it were. But we're going to look at some of the tools which feature in the Edit Poly system. We're not going to look at absolutely everything, because we don't have time to do that in this DVD. But we're going to look at some of the tools, and you'll get an idea of how you can actually model in polys very quickly, that you don't necessarily need to smooth the surfaces. You can just build polygon models as is, especially when you're working on mechanical objects like the go-kart. So let's move on now and make a start on our model.